Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jay Silverberg, President of the Southern Jewish Historical Society. It's a privilege to welcome you to what I am confident will be an unforgettable hour or more of history as lived by those who made it. Briefly, before we begin our program, I want to thank our co-sponsors, the Bremen Museum in Atlanta, particularly Jeremy Katz, Senior Director of Archives, and Rabbi Merrill Shapiro, Patriarch of the St. Augustine Jewish Historical Society, truly the spirit behind today's program and for all he and his Florida colleagues have done to keep this story front and center for the past several years. I want to give you some sense for June 1964. Landmark civil rights legislation installed in Congress. Martin Luther King's presence throughout the nation is growing by the day as he targets St. Augustine, which he describes in a letter from jail as, quote, the most lawless community in which we have ever worked, close quote. Reverend King writes from jail to his good friend, Rabbi Israel Dresner, seeking help for the cause. Rabbi Dresner, the rabbi at Temple Sherei Shalom in Springfield, New Jersey, is at the Central Conference of American Rabbis in upstate New York when he receives the letter. In less than 24 hours, he and 15 of his colleagues, including Rabbi Gerald Goldstein, assistant rabbi at Mount Zion Hebrew Congregation in St. Paul, Minnesota, and Rabbi Alan Setcher, rabbi of an English-speaking congregation in Mexico City, arrive in St. Augustine. Why we went is their story. We are honored today to have Rabbis Goldstein, Setcher, and Dresner with us. Each will talk for about 5 minutes or so. Emphasis on the or so. Steve Whitfield, the Max Richter Professor of American Civilization Emeritus at Brandeis University and a longtime supporter of the Southern Jewish Historical Society, will then step in to help moderate additional discussion and manage questions from our Zoom audience. Please put your questions into the chat. Now, Jeremy Katz is going to take us back to 1964 by showing a 2-minute video. It's the arrest footage from when these 3 men were put into jail for protesting in St. Augustine.
You're not going to look here. You're on private property. Get out of here. Every one of you. You're on private property here. Get away from here.
On this congregation.
Go to.
Oh God, our Heavenly Father, we pray that
Private property.
lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. For thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest the table before me in the presence of mine enemies.
Come here, Rabbi.
He restores my soul.
Take your hands off. You go to jail. Me like a human being. You're on private property. Get those cameras down here.
From his vantage point across the street, Dr. Martin Luther King, the Negro leader, watched the proceedings but did not take part. This is CBS News correspondent Harry Arrow in St. Augustine, Florida.
Good afternoon. I'm Rabbi Jerry Goldstein. I was one of those rabbis arrested. That moment you heard my words. I said unkindly to the 2 policemen, "Get your hands off me. I am a human being." Well, I went to jail for trespassing. I went to jail for breaching the peace. I went to jail because I was part of a conspiracy. Those were 3 real charges, and the record is here in the booking of the St. Johns County Jail. While we were in the jail overnight, we together, all of us rabbis, wrote an article called Why We Went. And I've been asked that question hundreds of times ever since 1964. Why we went? Well, I went because I was at a conference of several hundred rabbis, and we heard the very first words of the conference, a reading by Rabbi Cy Dresner of a request from Martin Luther King, "Come stand with us here in St. Augustine." And I said yes. Sometimes in life, A yes is a big yes. And that big yes for me meant a lifetime of rabbinic work dedicated to justice and equality for all Americans. Let me read the first paragraph of our statement, our joint statement. You can find it online. It's called Why We Went, a letter from the rabbis arrested in St. Augustine. We came to St. Augustine mainly because we could not stay away. We could not say no to Martin Luther King, whom we always respected and admired, and whose loyal friends we hope we shall be in the days to come. We could not pass by the opportunity to achieve a moral goal by moral means, a rare modern privilege, which has been the glory of non-violent struggle for civil rights. I say that was a great moment in American history, and I was part of it. It makes me a footnote in history, but I am there as a keynote. What we did was say that the rights to liberty and equality should be available to all Americans, not just to white Americans, not just Black Americans, but all Americans. And that's been a case I've been working on for 57 years of my rabbinate. 57 years ago, I, my colleague Rabbi Setcher, my colleague Rabbi Cy Dressner, we all went to St. Johns County Jail for a miserable 24 hours where we were lectured to on how we shouldn't have come and why it was stupid for us to come, why it was immoral for us to come, why it was communistic for us to come. And to all that we said, no, we came because this is what we as rabbis know is the right thing to be doing. Alan, read the second paragraph.
We came because we could not stand silently by our brother's blood. We have done that too many times before. We've been vocal on our exhortation of others, but the idleness of our hands too often revealed an inner silence. Silence at a time when silence became the unpardonable sin of our time. We came in the hope that the God of us all would accept our small involvement as partial atonement for the many things we wish we had done before and often. So I guess it's my turn. And I want to start by saying we were 16 rabbis and a layman, Al Vorspan. I believe it's the largest incarceration of rabbis in US history. My role is to tell you of a couple of the incidents during the course of June 18. The first was the evening of the 17th, where we were gathered at a church, and at the church, King, Andy Young, and Abernathy gave us instructions as to what to expect and how to handle what might happen. And the biggest was, hey, you got a good shot at being beaten. You're certainly going to be arrested for standing in your power. That's going to be a for sure. But if you are tempted to resist, do not resist silently and quietly, because if you fight back, they win. And the answer therein is they shouldn't. win. King also said to us, you know, we've been marching for a number of days from the black neighborhood through the white neighborhood to the slave market, and then reverse coming back. We're going to do that again tonight. Now, I want you to know, a number of days ago, Andy Young was beaten with the inch of his life at the slave market. I also want you to know that last night on our march, we were shot. Someone was shot. Now, we've called out the National Guard, but of course, you know, many of the National Guard are crackers. And so, go, baby, go. So we went. As things would have it, I was the first in line. And I was paired up with a young black girl. Now, my guess would be is we were about 100 on the march in twos. And we were instructed to hold hands and sing. I tell you this, and Jerry Goldstein has said the same thing, the scariest 2 hours of our lives, because lined up in the white neighborhood, beside the trees and perchance up the trees where the shot had come from, were hecklers. And they screamed everything at us, absolutely everything, every epithet you could possibly remember. And so we marched. And so it was one deep breath during the course of that march, but we went, we got through the white neighborhood, we got to the slave market, we did a prayer service, and then we came back. Even now, I'm taking a deep breath that we made it. And then let me tell you about the next incident. The next incident took place. We, the 17 of us, were divided up. In Jerry Goldstein's case, he was to go to the restaurant. In some of the cases, they went to, I think it was the local Woolworths. In my case, I was at a prayer service in the parking lot. During the course of that prayer service, a car pulls up, and out of the car, in bathing suits, jumps 7 kids. They go through the parking lot, across a fence, and leap into the pool. Now, the pool was filled, it's June. The pool is filled with revelers. They immediately leap out of the pool, and the kids jump into the pool. James Brock, the manager of all this, is so upset by what happened that he grabs 2-gallon jugs of muriatic acid, and he begins to pour the muriatic acid into the pool. I witnessed the most courageous sights I've ever seen. Those 7 kids did not budge. Now, Brock didn't know, and the kids didn't know, that muriatic acid dissolves when it hits water. They stayed. There's a famous picture of the Jones girl, just literally screaming. The kids did not get out of the pool until a cop in clothes with a gun at his side leaped in and pushed him out. And thereafter, you just saw it, we got arrested. So, Cy Dresner, that's my 7 minutes or whatever it is. The third paragraph is yours.
I read from our statement why we went. We came as Jews who remember the millions of faceless people who stood quietly watching the smoke rise from Hitler's crematoria. We came because we know that, second only to silence, the greatest danger to human beings is less of faith in man's specialty to capacity to act. I was one of the first 2 rabbis arrested in the civil rights movement. I was arrested along with a rabbi who died, unfortunately, 15 years ago, named Martin Friedman. We were arrested in June of 1961, 3 years before the arrest in St. Augustine. Marty and I were arrested in what was called a freedom ride. We left on a bus, a Greyhound bus from Washington, D.C., and tried to integrate facilities along the way. We were eventually arrested in St. Augustine in Tallahassee, Florida, the capital of Florida, several days later for sitting in the dining room in the restaurant of the airport in Tallahassee. Tallahassee is the capital of Florida. It's in the northern part of the state. And Marty and I were the first two rabbis arrested in the struggle. I was arrested again in 1962 in a little city about 280 miles south of Atlanta, which was a big city. I was arrested in Albany, Georgia, with 9 other rabbis, one of whom was Rabbi Alan Setcher. And Setch and I were arrested again in St. Augustine 2 years later in June of 1964. The reason that St. Augustine, a small city about 23 miles south of a large Florida city named Jacksonville, was the center of the civil rights movement in 1964, was that it was celebrating the 400th anniversary of the foundation of the oldest European city in America, which was founded in 1564 by the Spaniards in Florida, namely St. Augustine. And St. Augustine was celebrating the 400th anniversary and was asking money from the Congress of the United States to celebrate the 400th anniversary of the oldest white European settlement in what is today the United States, namely in St. Augustine. There was a filibuster going on at the time in 1964 in the United States Senate. The Southern senators, about 25 of them, there was one exception who did not participate in the filibuster. It was a senator from a Democratic senator from Tennessee named Albert Gore Sr., the father of the Albert Gore who ran for president in the year 2000. And he refused to participate in the filibuster, which was very courageous on his part. And of course, he was defeated in the next election by a Republican. So his courage resulted in his defeat. But the filibuster was the longest single filibuster in American history. In those days, you had to talk round the clock in the filibuster. It's not like today where you push a button and you have a vote right away. And if you don't get today 60 votes, in those days it was 67 votes, 2/3 of the Senate. The filibuster went on for more than 2 months, where for 24 hours a day, the 25 Southern senators were relieving each other, talking, reading out of dictionaries or whatever. The filibuster ended the day after we were arrested in St. Augustine, the 17 of us, the 16 rabbis and the Social Action Commission director of Reform Judaism, Al Vorspan. And the filibuster ended, and the Civil Rights Act of 1964, not the Voting Rights Act, which was passed in 1965 as a result of what was going on in 1965 in Selma, Alabama. But the Civil Rights Act of 64 dealt with public accommodations. It dealt with restaurants and stores and bus stations and train stations and airports, et cetera, et cetera. And we, 17 of us, sort of claimed that we helped break the filibuster. I don't know that that was true. I think it was the 2 months that the filibuster went on before they were able to get 67 votes to break it. But in any event, we were very pleased when we got out of jail 24 hours after we were arrested and flew home and discovered that the filibuster had ended, and the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which was introduced by President Kennedy and enacted under President Lyndon Baines Johnson, so that we 17 made a very important Jewish statement. As Rabbi Setcher pointed out, there had never been that many rabbis arrested together at one time in American history. And so the 16 of us, plus the social action director, who was not an ordained rabbi, Al Vorsman, when we were arrested, it made an important statement, particularly because it was in the oldest white European settlement in what is today the United States, St. Augustine, Florida. And
Rabbi Dresner, let me interrupt here, please, because you've ended on a high note in terms of the historical significance of what the 16 rabbis and Al Vorspan did. And it's now an opportunity. We thank you for the remarks from all three of you. I'm thrilled to participate. What I would like to do is ask the three of you something about what Rabbi Setcher said a little bit earlier, having to do with the danger that you were in. I got the impression from Rabbi Setcher that you learned a little bit more detail about that after you had already accepted the call from Martin Luther King. So I guess my opening question or double question is the following. How much of your decision to go to St. Augustine, to leave New York very suddenly, was based upon the extraordinary moral and political stature of Martin Luther King? That is, was that a very specific, a very particular appeal that might not have been as effective if somebody else had uttered it? And secondly, how much were you aware of whatever peril, physical danger you would have been in by going, in fact, to St. Augustine? So Rabbi Goldstein, let me start with you, please.
Those are challenging questions, to be sure. Let me tell you, I was somewhat naive in 1963. I'd grown up here in Los Angeles. I'm born here. I'm a tall white male, and nobody ever messed with me. And it was outside of my mental framework that anybody would go after me and try to kill me or break me or burn me. It took me a while. I also, at that point, Martin Luther King was not Saint Martin yet. He was a preacher down south. I had read about him a little bit, but he was not a great hero to me. I had heard a little bit about rumblings in the South. And I thought, well, I was curious. I wanted to go see what was going on. I went innocently, naively, to sort of be an observer of what the scene is. That cracked open when we lined up outside the church to go march downtown, as Alan has spoken. And when we were told, you are pledged to nonviolence, you're going to hear things said to you that you never want to hear, that you can't stand listening to. Don't shout back. Don't hit back. That's what they're waiting for. We stand in our justice and for nonviolence. So when they asked me, why did you go? I didn't go to be a hero. I went to be an observer. But those events in which I put myself on the line for my principles of inclusion, of equality, that was generated in me. Is it a conversion experience? I've been asked that lots of times. I don't know. Conversion experiences, there's something mystical that happened, I don't know, in the middle of the night. No, I earned my right by being there and walking in innocence and into a sense of complexity and justice. And that has stayed with me ever since. I hope that's an answer.
Yes, thank you. Rabbi Setcher, did Martin Luther King specifically have the stature that made it all the more compelling for you to go to St. Augustine? And also how, if I may say, how naive were you about the peril that you possibly faced there?
So Steve, my reaction is different than Jerry's. That is, I grew up in small town America. I grew up in a steel town in Western Pennsylvania, wherein I can recall at age 5 or 6 of rocks being thrown at my head and busted open with Jew bastard on the other side of the rock. So I had all kinds of experience through high school. I was the only Jew in my high school class, not permitted to play on the high school golf team because the country club was restricted. So that my reaction is, I'm going to do this because I want this kind of crap to stop. And so that I had also a different experience. By the time St. Augustine came about, I already had 2 years earlier the experience in Albany, Georgia. So I had already met King and Abernathy and Young. And did I see King? I saw him as a mentor. I saw him as he's speaking my truth. And so that when the call came at the rabbinic convention in Atlantic City, it took me 1 minute and 10 seconds to say, of course I'm going to go. No, I already knew of the danger. I already knew that I could be beaten. I already knew. But my reaction was, of course I'll go. Because what does a moralistic person do? He stands up for what's right. I didn't have any hesitancy. Scared? I wanted to be here to be part of this session today.
We're glad you're here. Very glad you're here.
So, no, Jerry said it right. We were not heroes. We were just doing what was right.
Sure.
And that's the way it turned out. Okay?
Right. Rabbi Dresner, did Martin Luther King have a special place in terms of compelling you to go to St. Augustine? And I know you were arrested in Tallahassee, you were arrested in Albany. So did you also have some special awareness from those two experiences of the danger that you might be facing in St. Augustine in June of '64?
Dr. King and I had become friends in Albany, Georgia in 1962. I did not meet him during the Freedom Ride of 1961 that I was arrested in, but we met in Albany, Georgia in 1962. Dr. King had asked me in Albany to go up north and bring down rabbis to get arrested in Albany. And he asked a white Methodist minister who had been arrested with me in a freedom ride in '61 named Ralph Lord Roy to go up and bring down ministers. And the two of us came back down to Albany with 75 clergymen, 10 of whom were rabbis, one of whom was Rabbi Setcher, one of whom was, of course, me. So I was already considered a veteran of the civil rights movement by 1964 when Dr. King asked me to bring rabbis down to St. Augustine, as I said earlier in my remarks. And I was able to recruit 15 other rabbis plus Al Vorspan, and the 17 of us came down to St. Augustine. I joined the civil rights movement for three reasons. One, because of the teachings of the Jewish faith, that we are all one humanity. That's the religious and ethical meaning of the early chapters of Genesis, that we're all descended from Adam and Eve, so that we're all brothers and sisters, all of us are cousins, and that's the teachings of my faith. When Moses says later on in the Pentateuch, in the Torah, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. It doesn't say just your Jewish neighbor. And remember, the Hebrew, is different from the English. Neighbor can mean the guy who lives next door to you, or lives in the same neighborhood as you do. But in Hebrew, there's a different word for the person who lives near you. That word is shachen. The word neighborhood is shchuna, from the same root. But the Hebrew word, you shall love your fellow human being as yourself, is what the Hebrew says. It's not the guy who lives or the gal who lives next door to you or near you. So that was the first reason I went, the teachings of my faith. The second reason was the experience of my people, the Jewish people. We have been oppressed for literally thousands of years. We were oppressed for religious reasons. We were called Christ killers, etc., etc. The first anti-Semitic experience I ever had was I was collecting for the Karen Kayemet Israel, the Jewish
National Fund.
The JNF, the Jewish National Fund. And I was 6 years old. I was a yeshiva bacher. I was not in a public school. I was in an Orthodox day school. And let me interject at this point. It was the Reform movement who provided almost, I would say, 90% of all the rabbis who participated in the civil rights movement. The other 10% were provided by the conservative movement. There was no Reconstructionist movement in those days. So that I'm very grateful to the Reform movement and to the president at that time of the Reform movement, whose name was Rabbi Maurice Eisendrath, who was a real civil rightnik in every way imaginable. I introduced him to Dr. King in 1963 at the UAHC biennial convention in Chicago. The UAHC was the name of the Reform movement in those days, the Union of American Hebrew Congregations. We have a new name, the URJ, the Union for Reform Judaism. But
Rabbi, I have to introduce, what was the third reason that you gave?
Dr. King asked me to bring down rabbis, and 15 other rabbis and Al Vorspan volunteered to go. And they knew what the Jewish people had experienced, not just in the Holocaust, but for literally 2,000 years of anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic hatred of Jews. And the third reason I went, aside from Jewish teachings and the Jewish experience, was the American ideal. The Constitution begins with the words, "We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice." Those are the first words of the Constitution. Remember, 11 years earlier in the Declaration of Independence, it says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men," they meant all people, "are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable," it says not in, "unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." That's the American dream. That's the American ideal. That's the American goal. We have not reached it even today, although we've moved closer to it today than we did in 1964 when we
Yes,
were arrested.
And I'm sorry, I've got to get back to 1964, excuse me. But let me just ask then a further question. Did any of you meet any of the Jewish population of St. Augustine during the time that you were there? Did you get any reactions from Southern Jews at all for what you had done?
During our stay in jail, the sheriff of the county, who was the warden of the jail, he brought us a guest to speak to us rabbis. You got to get this picture, the 17 of us and 2 Episcopalians all jammed into this jail cell for, I think, 4 people or 2 people. A miserable, hot place. And he brought us a visitor, the president of the synagogue, to talk to us. Now, the sheriff was also the head of the Ku Klux Klan for the county, as I understood it. Standing, Mr., and I've always forgotten his name, the president of the synagogue, who owned a clothing store on Main Street, whose life was on the line there, literally. All he had to do is say one negative word about blacks, and his store would have been burned down in the next 10 minutes. So he proceeded to say what he had to say, the script. "You rabbis don't know what you're doing. You're really not being proper rabbis. You should stay where you were. You're sent in here as infiltrators. You're sent in, you are tools of machinery that you don't understand. It's very bad for us here to have you here. Go home." Now, what else could a Jew in that town in those days have said right there in the presence of the head of the Ku Klux Klan? I was sad to hear him talk. It made some of my colleagues mad, but I was sad because that man was trapped by the circumstances of his life. We stood up for what we knew was right. I'm sorry it made trouble for him, but I was glad that I made trouble for him. I was, as they charged me, I was part of a conspiracy of what Martin Luther King said, "Here's Moses's people come to stand with us." I was standing as one of Moses's people, a modern leader of Moses's people, to say segregation cannot be allowed. It has to be broken.
Thank you. Did anybody want to add to that in terms of the local St. Augustine community other than the president of the synagogue?
Well,
Any other sense of the reaction of the Jewish community of St. Augustine during the very brief time that you were there?
Steve,
You have to remember, oh, I'm sorry, is it set?
Go ahead, Rabbi Setzer.
Yeah, as best I recall, we didn't hear from anybody else from the Jewish community. Other than the president, that was it. And that was sometime late at night that he came in.
Yes. Now, one of the questions that's puzzled me about your experience, what kind of legal representation did you have? And how were your lawyers selected, and what exactly did they do to deal with charges like breach of the peace, trespass, and conspiracy? Who were your lawyers and what did they do?
That's funny. I could say to you, Steve, what lawyers? I don't remember. Jerry and Cy, maybe, I don't remember. My guess would Southern Christian Leadership provided some sort of, we had to have lawyers in order to get us out of jail.
Right.
Well, the NAACP legal defense team was at work on it, and their lawyers were around. I don't remember meeting them. Maybe, you know, we were let out of jail on $300 bail for each of the 3 offenses. $300, think of it as $3,000 in today's dollars. $9,000 today would be sort of an equivalent of what was on us. The first thing that when I got out of jail and flew home to Los Angeles, my parents had a little gathering of all their friends and relatives who wanted to meet me. My picture had been on the front page of the LA Times, for goodness sakes. They wanted to meet me. And immediately among them, they raised the money for the bail, which was paid then to the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. But boy, were they applauding me. They were so proud that I had done what I had done. And maybe I want to answer, as long as we're on that topic. What is it? I think I've been asked this just this last week. What lasting effect did it have? Well, I think those people, those white Jews that I talked to back there in Los Angeles, none of them had been activists in the freedom cause. When I got back to my synagogue in St. Paul, Minnesota, I was really scared that they would have been embarrassed. I was in a nice, proper upper Midwest synagogue, the oldest original synagogue of Minnesota territory, right down the street from the state capitol. Would they be embarrassed that their rabbi had been arrested and gone to jail? Not at all. Wow, what a welcome. What a welcome.
Terrific.
Never in my whole life have I ever had such an enthusiastic congregation as was with me on Yom Kippur morning that fall when I talked about my experience.
Even though you had a rap sheet.
Yeah.
I didn't have the rap sheet actually until more recently. Somehow I got it, but this is the rap sheet that shows me being arrested and sent to the jail.
Steve, one PS to this, the opposite, not from me, but from Rabbi Hanan Sills, who was the assistant rabbi in Milwaukee. And when he returned home, his office windows had been shot up by someone from the locals. And he did not return home to great approbation, but mostly the shoot up in the window. So the frightening aspect of this continued after he got out. Here's another piece of trivia, as I best remember it. Bearing in mind, 57 years later, for three elderly guys here. When it came time to write why we went, we had a problem. The problem was they had taken everything from us, from our pockets, while they were booking us.
You must remember that the Jewish population of the South was few and far between in those days. Only 4% of the Jews of America lived in the former slave states.
Yeah,
Today,
Rabbi, excuse me. Go ahead, Rabbi Setcher.
Today it's 25% lived in those states.
Yeah. Okay,
So,
Rabbi Setcher, please continue.
But
things were taken out of your pockets.
Right. They had taken everything out of our pockets. In some cases, the glasses even that we had. But one of the guys had the stub of a pencil in his pocket. Then we looked around for something to write on. And what we found, as best I remember, Steve, what we found was an old Klan poster, a poster announcing a Klan rally. And why we went was written on the back of that Klan poster. Now, and all of us took part. We were blessed in jail with Rabbi Eugene Borowitz, who a major Jewish theologian.
Yes.
But we all contributed. We said that was something to do, to write that. Otherwise, we started out telling bad jokes, and that didn't work for a while. So then, but we all had something to say or correct or change, so that all of this was the spirit of 17 people.
Fantastic. And that document, which of course was read at the beginning of this program, where did that document go? Where did it get sent? Does anybody remember?
You must remember that the Klan was not just anti-Black, it was anti-Semitic, it was anti-Catholic, it was anti-immigrant, and you had to be a native-born white Christian, white Protestant, to qualify to be a real American as such. So that when we went south, the Jewish community was a tiny community. Florida did not have 650,000 Jews as it has today. It had 1% of that, 6,500 in those days. So that the Jewish community in the South was a very frightened and a very scared and a very terrified community. And they, most of them thought that those of us who were active in the civil rights movement were causing them problems. And I understand that, by the way. I'm not holding this against the few Jews who lived in the South in those days and who were outnumbered 200, 300 to 1 kind of thing where they lived. So that some of the Jews of the South were very, very courageous, by the way. There was a rabbi in Mississippi in that category. And Mississippi was the worst of the worst. It had the highest Black population, percentage-wise in the whole South.
Yeah, but in the time that you were in St. Augustine, that kind of support or that kind of solidarity was really not available, of course. You were not there long enough to have received that, I'm assuming. Yeah, Rabbi Setcher?
We arrived on the 17th, 17th in late afternoon, went through the 18th, jail overnight, and sometime on the 19th.
Yes. And what happened, and then I'll turn it back over to Jeremy Katz. What was the disposition legally of your cases? Were you ever convicted? Were you convicted and then overturned on appeal? Are you still in effect, how shall I put it, ex-cons?
Steve, I'm still out on bail.
Oh no.
No, he isn't.
This is shocking.
It's jury. the fact is, the charges were all dismissed at the urging of the lawyers. Remember, the first Civil Rights Act was passed through the Congress that summer, and it negated the charges that had been made against us. I don't know if the money was refunded by the county or not. I don't know enough about law, but there was plenty of money as far as from my Minnesota congregation and my family alone. I think the NAACP Legal Defense Fund probably made a profit, but that's not the story. You know what the story is, that what we did and our telling of this story to white people made lots of white people in America more engaged in this whole process. For that, I think I take credit. It was easy to say that's a problem for Blacks. And what I've learned is segregation is not a problem for Blacks, it's a problem for whites. If they can't do anything about it because they're the victims. We are the ones who have the, what should we say, the key to unlocking the prison of American racism. And we have to respond to that.
Yes, and this is a
I
very
would like to thank,
to turn this
I would
over
like
to
thank the
Jeremy.
Southern Jewish Historical Society for bringing Rabbi Goldstein, Rabbi Setcher, and me together. It was such a wonderful thing to see Rabbi Goldstein and Setcher. It was, as we say in Yiddish, a machaya, a revivifying experience that God has allowed the three of us to still be alive and still
That's
have
terrific.
some of our marbles.
That's right. And we're not over yet, because the three rabbis will now be subjected to further questions via Jeremy Katz from the Bremen Museum. Jeremy, over to you.
Thank you so much, Steve, for moderating this discussion. It's so wonderful having such an accomplished historian as well as a Jacksonville native being part of the program. We've received a lot of questions from the audience, and we only have a few minutes left, so we'll get to as many as we can before our time expires. You all talked about the difference between Northern rabbis and Southern rabbis, but can you talk a little bit about the difference in terms of denomination? Was there a contrast that you could draw between the Reform movement, the conservative movement, or maybe even the Orthodox movement in terms of their actions or lack thereof during the civil rights movement?
Probably the majority of rabbis who were engaged and continue to be engaged in this issue of segregation are of the Reformed Jewish background. But I don't want to turn this into a contest between denominations. It's where the focus lies. The focus of Reform Judaism has always been on social justice, issues of social justice. That was baked into my education. I grew up in a Reformed Jewish family. I was bar mitzvah and confirmed and all that stuff. I don't want to minimize it. I had the background of a Reformed Jew in the Hebrew Union College, the grand old synagogue college, the seminar for the training, education of Reformed rabbis. We are all graduates of that. And the motto there really is, the work of a Reformed Jew is in social justice. We are all called to do it. How well we do it, that's up for debate. But that it is a center focus of our Reformed Jewish learning is obvious, even to our compatriots in the other denominations.
In Hebrew, we call it tikkun olam, repairing the world. We are, each of us, all of us are instructed as we live our lives to contribute to tikkun olam, repairing the world, making the world a better place.
Right. Yeah, Shai's right on that.
in the sense of even background. There was a Sunday school textbook when we were first in the rabbinate called it Camp Kitov. It was that you got every Sunday morning, the whole idea of Tikkun Olam. So it was part of us and part of the reform movement. I don't know that any of the other movements had a social justice commission in those. So this was a natural. It was a natural for all three of us and the other rabbis who participated. I think that answers it, Jeremy.
Definitely does. Well, we've seen a period of time of social unrest in our own, especially in this last year or so. Can you all talk about the part of your work that was inspired by this event, and also what you would be doing today? What is your charge today for the rabbinate? And this will be the last question. So maybe like 30 seconds from each of you to kind of close us out.
30 seconds, are you kidding?
I could talk 30 minutes on that, but let me summarize it. When I went back to Mount Zion Temple for the synagogue's 150th anniversary, they asked me to give a sermon, and I gave a sermon. After the service, a young man came up to greet me. He identified himself as, I think it was Michael Cohen. I really didn't remember it. He'd been a member of the confirmation class in 1984. He is now, or he was then, in the Minnesota State Legislature, an elected representative from St. Paul. And he told me he is engaged in every single social justice piece of legislation. The reporters always ask him, Mr. Cohen, why are you always involved in social justice legislation? And his answer in one sentence is, because my rabbi went to jail. That makes me cry. That somehow or other, this 15-year-old, 16-year-old boy, he got the message, not from my words, but from my feet. It is what I did, and it is what he does for the state of Minnesota.
Section, Jerry, know that I can't say hello in 30 seconds, but again, it was such a pleasure and a privilege to be with Jerry and Setch for this, and I only can say ad me'ave esrim bis 120 Jahr, until 120.
Thanks, Sai. Thank you very much.
Rabbi Sesher, do you want to bring us home with your final thoughts?
My great answer every time I speak about this, and I hooray for the Historical Society, because it's firsthand that you heard today, not through a history book. But my charge is always keep it going. The whole idea, it's Black Lives Matter all over the place, but not just, Sai said it, it's not just Black Lives Matter, it's every lives matter. Here in this little town, we have faced huge anti-Semitism. It exists, but you have to stand up. I learned, Steve Whitfield, I learned at Brandeis this phrase, illegitimus non carborundum, and I translate it easily, don't let the bastards get you down. So if we keep battling, more and more will join the march.
Shalom lehitraot.
What a perfect way to end the program. Thank you so much, rabbis, for sharing your stories and insight with us. What a treat to hear about history from those who made it. I also want to recognize Avi Dresner, the son of Rabbi Sai Dresner, as well as Gerald Perry and his partner, Amy Geller, who are award-winning documentarians and are in the early stages of creating a film about the story that has a tentative premiere date of fall 2022. The Bremen and Southern Jewish Historical Society are looking forward to its completion and hope to offer screenings to our members. I also want to thank Rabbi Shapiro from St. Augustine, who was a true inspiration behind the program and has done much to keep alive the memory of the protest. The St. Augustine Jewish Historical Society is holding its annual commemoration of the event in downtown St. Augustine this Saturday, June 18th. The plaque downtown that honors the rabbis and discusses the protests was inspired by Rabbi Shapiro and the local Jewish Historical Society. I also want to thank Jay Silverberg and the Southern Jewish Historical Society for making this program happen today. I'm happy to share that the Southern Jewish Historical Society annual conference is going forward with plans for an in-person conference October 22nd through 24th in Charleston. Registration information will soon be posted on their website, www.jewishsouth.org. Lastly, a survey will be sent to every registered participant for today's program. Please take a few minutes to complete it, as it provides invaluable feedback for improving future programs and analytics for grant funding. Thank you again so much for attending today, and I hope to see you all again soon. A recording of this program will be made available on the Bremen Museum's YouTube page in the coming days. Thank you all so much, and take care.